Hello, I'm Pastor Hilly. Thank you for joining us for Faith Lutheran Church's Adult Forum series. We're calling this episode The Least of These. But before we get to our special guest for this week, a brief reminder that during this time of social distancing, there is wonderful ministry coming out of the community that we call Faith Lutheran Church in Whitehall, Ohio. Ministry that includes this very series. If you would like to support the ministry of faith financially, please find the link labeled Give in the description below. And with that, on to this week's guest. Joining me today is the U.S. Director of Another Child Foundation, a wonderful golfer, and a great personal friend of mine for over a decade, Mr. Tim Oloffson. Tim, how are you, my friend?
It is good to be with you today, Dan. All is well.
Good. How is the socially distant world treating you and yours over there in Illinois?
Well, it's been challenging to say the least, but as a family, we've decided, and as our church, we've kind of decided to adopt instead of looking at this as a hindrance, we're trying to look at this as an opportunity to get the gospel out and to do different things. So it's a mentality, it's an attitude, but we're looking at it as an opportunity instead of something we're having to deal with. Just looking for the goodness that can come out of it.
Nice. When this whole thing happened, I was thinking, you and I met in 2008? Yeah, fall 2008. And I was over there at St. Matthew's in Princeton, and the good Reverend Jeff Schlesinger put me on that big scavenger hunt to meet different people at different parts of the town. And I met you at the golf course. And I think it took you about 30 seconds to realize that entirely lost cause. And so
I don't know about that, Dan.
But realizing that, didn't you kind of turn to the conversation and started talking about Another Child Foundation? And that was really the genesis of kind of our relationship and a lot of things that have happened since then.
Yeah, well, I could sense that you had a heart for mission and for ministry, not just to the congregation, but to reach out into the world. And I sense that. I feel I have two things I'm really passionate about, well, besides my family, my faith, and that's golf and mission. And so the one didn't pan out very well, the golf, but the mission did. So it was good to meet you that day.
Yeah. And so, really what I want to talk about today is the work of Another Child Foundation and just everything that organization does, because there are so many arms that reach into so many different missions and outreaches and help so many people around the world. And then I kind of want to talk about what ACF is doing during this COVID era. But for people who may be listening or watching who are entirely unfamiliar with Another Child Foundation, can you give me just a brief history of the organization and the goals that you have for the ministry?
Sure. So really, Another Child Foundation was kind of born on my first international mission trip. Went on a trip, it was called Shoes for Orphan Souls. It just happened to be the country of Romania. Sometimes people ask me, how did you choose Romania? And I didn't choose Romania. I feel God and Romania chose me. So I went over there and just saw really the needs of outside of the Western world for the first time. And I saw the disparity and the poverty and the hopelessness that Eastern Europe that really finds itself in now. And really felt called to do something, but the Lord spoke to me in a really powerful way there and really asked me to become the voice of these voiceless children. So we use that term a lot in our thing. What we're trying to do is be the voice of voiceless children in the world, not just in Romania, but around the world, here in the U.S. Everywhere there's hopelessness and voicelessness, we just want to be a part of that.
I appreciate how part of that mission statement is very much like Batman, right? We want the voiceless and help wherever there's need. And I think that the church has gotten in trouble in the past by modeling itself after people a lot worse off than Batman, right? But I also use that, especially when talking to kids, right? This is what we do, because that's a really great one-to-one connection of this is what we're called to do. And I think that's Jesus's mission, right? Jesus's ministry on earth was wrapped up in he asked the question, or he says, which turns into a question, When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was naked, you clothed me. So wherever there is need, our call as people of faith is to respond to that need. And thank goodness there's organizations like Another Child Foundation that kind of extend their arms around the world in ways that the local congregation may not be able to. You know, I know in the month of August, our big pitch at Faith Lutheran here in Whitehall was that we wanted to reach out both across town, which we did by supporting the Lutheran Social Services Food Pantry, and also we wanted to reach across the world. And our ability to link up and partner with you guys, and we're going to get into a point of hope in a minute, gave us the opportunity to do both of those things, right? Last week, the gospel was the Jesus and Peter, where Jesus says to Peter, you know, you are the rock on which I build my church. And from a Catholic perspective, it's, you know, Peter, the person, is the rock. And that's where we get the Pope and the papacy. But from a more Lutheran perspective, we understand that Peter's faith is the rock. And I love that image because we are all rocks that God uses to build the church in so many different ways. You know, and so again, just to be able to be partners in ministry with ACF, to watch how God is building God's church by using us all in really different ways. That's the kingdom of heaven. Like that's why we're here.
Yeah, we believe we're in the ministry of reconciliation. We tell our mission trip people that if you think you're the haves going to serve the have-nots, the ministry is going to fail immediately. We're all broken people, but we're all reconciled through the love and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So when we think of it that way, that we're broken people going to serve broken people, then ministry can really happen because we can learn a lot from people who are broken. And we see ourselves in these people at times, and healing comes through that eye-opening experience. And that's what happens I believe when the international mission trip, people allow themselves to go on those, reconciliation happens within yourself. And plus we get to help heal the issues that some of these forgotten people have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you and I have done those trips to Romania more than a few times, and you know, you go over once or twice a year, and the work that happens there, I don't know. They talk about, especially in seminary, this kind of like savior complex of people who go over to mission trips wherever they are, whether it's in an inner city or another country, and they kind of walk in with that presumptuous mentality of like, let me swoop in and save whoever I can do. And I think that, I mean, through my experiences with ACF, and whether it's going to a Camp Margarita or Point of Hope, you walk in and it's first of all really humbling. But then so much of that ministry happens in that like spirit of reconciliation amongst the different volunteers, getting the international volunteers, getting to know the translators and the volunteers at Point of Hope, and then working with those kids. And it's cliche, but I think it's very true that, you know, every trip I've ever been on, wherever we went to those two locations, the volunteers on the last day always say, I feel like I've learned more from the kids in the experience than I could ever give back.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's core to that kind of reconciliation model, or reality, we should say, of ministry.
Yeah, because as we serve, we go to serve. That's our servant heart. We go to serve people. The guy is not going to just use that time to serve others. He's going to use it to change you, to use that trip as a catalyst in your own spiritual walk. Because we send missionaries out for a week or two at a time, and then they come back and they spend the majority of their life back in their community and congregations. So what we need to do is to use that trip as a catalyst, so when they come back to their congregation, they see the world differently, and they treat their people, they see things within their community differently, and then they'll be able to service their own people better. I'm a huge believer in the international mission trip, not so much just to go and serve other people, because a lot of times I get the question, why go serve other people when we have children in our own communities? well, you go and serve those kids, and you'll come back and you'll serve your kids better.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I mean, you and I did a trip together 2016 when I took my high school youth group over, and it was 14 high school kids and me and like 3 chaperones. And you and I were talking about this before I made the pitch to St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Avon, Connecticut. And I remember it vividly. We were talking about it, and you said, you know, the question you're going to get is, why Romania and why not somewhere closer? And I go, yep. As somebody who's been doing mission trips for a decade, it was always my rule that the mission trip had to be a minimum of 7 hours away from wherever I was living. And my thought for that was, if you're doing a mission trip in your own city or one town away, and a kid doesn't want to engage or a participant doesn't want to engage, especially in the modern era, they can call mom or dad or text whomever it is, they can pitch a fit, and they can go home if they want to. Mm-hmm. But you put that 8-hour kind of hurdle there, or you put kids on a plane and you engage in another country, and suddenly, like, it forces you to be a lot more present, which gets a lot more out of that experience. And it does change you in such a big way because you don't have an option.
You learn to trust God more.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
When you get totally out of your comfort zone, you need to be able to trust God. And that's what these trips do, is they allow you, because a lot of the questions I have is, how do I express love to a child I don't know their language and other things. So you got to depend on God to be able to help you do that. And yeah, so it's getting out of your comfort zone. Get out of the boat, walk on the water.
Yeah. I also think that, like, if you don't have that opportunity to go home at the end of the day, or have, you know, your parent or whomever pick you up, it turns inconveniences into bigger God moments, because you're looking for that window that's open if the door's been shut. You know, when we took the high school kids over, there were 18 of us. I want to say 14 kids and 4 chaperones. And in our flight, they lost all of the baggage for 15 of the 18 people. So we landed in Bucharest. Like, I had a bag. One of the high school boys had a bag, and 2 of the high school girls had a bag, and that was it. And we were going up to the camp, which was like 8 hours outside of Bucharest. And so we swung by what is it, a Didi Man, or the Walmart, bought a bunch of underwear for everybody. And one of the things that we did was we did that big clothing drive. So we had, and somehow those bags got through. All the clothing that we were donating to ACF got through. So we get there, and it was a total loaves and fishes story. Like, we have, 3-4 bags for 18 people, but then we have, 120 pounds of donatable clothing. And I'm like, guess you're wearing this. Like, here we go. And, the kids were kind of put out, but within 2 hours of being on that bus and going, all right, let go, trust God, it's going to work out. And no one, it became a joke. It became a joke by a day into it.
Yep.
Yeah. So speaking of just Romania and the trips over there, the 2 experiences I've had are one doing the summer vacation Bible school, which is a 1-week encompassed program at Camp Hagarita. And then the other one is the Point of Hope Center. And so I really want to talk about Tarneveni and Point of Hope. And can you just kind of give us a little background? Because I feel like I know a little bit about the background of it. As you know me, I read about everything. But when people ask me the story, I'm like, in the 20s, it was a hospital, and then the government gifted it to ACF or something like that. So can you give us the backstory?
Yeah. So back in 2007, we had been doing ministry in orphanages for a number of years, and they were starting to shut these orphanages down. So we were finding ourselves, because they were putting them in group homes, and they were retitling these children as wards of the state and not as orphans, because to get into the European Union, they needed to get rid of their orphan problem. So they just recategorized kids as wards of the state and put them in group homes. The problem still existed, but they just shuffled the cards a little bit and redealt it. So it looked different. So anyway, we're looking for a ministry. opportunity. And then they took us to Tarneveni, and they said, what these kids need here in the Gypsy community is education. So we started with a preschool program. We brought kids in at the age of 3 years old and gave them 3 to 4 years of good preschool education. So when these children went into the public schools, which the kids still do, and we encourage public school because they got to integrate with other Romanians to be able to get through this stigma of the Gypsy live over here and they're the stupid, dirty ones on the edge of town versus the regular Romanians. So we encourage the kids to go to the public school. So we started with the 3 years of preschool education, and that totally changed everything. Suddenly these children who at one time had a 60 to 70% dropout rate in the first grade. So these kids were dropping out almost immediately as soon as they got to school because they were unprepared, they were sick, they were dirty, the teachers didn't like them, and they would just ignore them, and eventually these kids would go away. But suddenly these kids were coming into the first grade, and they were prepared, and we actually try to prepare kids a year ahead of where the regular kids are at. So we try to get ahead of the game. So when these kids show up at first grade, these kids are already kind of know that, and it made a huge difference in the way they were perceived by their peers as well as the teachers. And suddenly the teachers started seeing value in these kids because they had the stigma of, oh, they're Gypsy, they're Roma, they don't have the ability to learn. Not that they just are dirty and kind of, outsiders, but their brains actually don't have the ability to learn. That was the thought process of many Romanians. So when they saw these kids in first grade doing better than their peers, that just opened their eyes, and suddenly these kids had hope and they had support from the public schools. And that was just the catalyst to really give these kids hope. And many of these kids have not just doing well in school, but they are exceedingly doing better and better. This last year, we had our whole 8th grade class. Every one of them passed their exams that they have to do to go into high school. So we were 8 for 8. 8 kids kind of made it through the entire program. And all 8 kids end up passing their exams, going on to high school, and every one of them has a dream to go on to college. And I asked Daci, I said, 5 years ago, what would have been that statistic? And he said 0. There would have been one child, maybe one, that would have even had any desire to go on to higher learning. Because most Gypsy, they drop out after the 8th grade, even if they get that far. High school was never, that was an afterthought. But 8 out of 8, that's amazing testimony to the work going on at the Point of Hope and the staff there.
So you started by doing this kind of preschool program targeted at the orphan community, orphan and then Gypsy Roma community, and so it's taken off. It's addressing a need. And so, how did you end up with the physical building that is Point of Hope?
Yeah. Well, they gave it to us, so we told them we would renovate it. It was an old dilapidated building. It was made out of concrete, though, so the structure was still there, but all of the wood and the electrical and stuff was all torn out. It was basically a shell of a building, but the structure was still there. So we decided to renovate it, and we told them that if we renovate this, they can give it to us for free. We don't actually own it, but we rent it for free on a continuing basis, as long as we have educational programs going on in the school. So in it was January of 2007, we decided we're going to take this project on. We had a group out of Dallas, Texas, headed up, and actually they donated all the materials. They completely renovated one floor of a 3-story building. We have access to 2 of those floors. And then over the years, we've renovated the other floor too. So now we have enough room for about 140 kids to come on a daily basis to the school. And it's beautiful. It's as nice as any preschool you'll see. And of course, you've seen that. But they take such pride in it. That's the amazing thing. We live right in the middle of a Gypsy community, which doesn't have a lot of violence, but there's a lot of petty crime. There's people doing those types of things because they got to survive. Mm-hmm. We've never had one incident against that school because they take pride in it. It's the jewel of their community.
Well, I think that goes back to what Point of Hope is doing is it's educating kids, it's providing, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, those new facilities like the cooking and the wood shop facilities. It's providing showers and food. So if you live in a community and adjacent to that community is this building or this outreach that is educating generations of your children, then that pulls in that kind of community awareness. I think it was Dacian who said to me that Point of Hope was the best protected building in that entire community, because everybody in town is like, that's where our kids get educated. That's where my kid eats. That's how my kid is gonna, elevate beyond, like the starting level, which is every parent's desire for their child. You touched on a few. Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I kind of touched on a few things that I'd like to just spend a little time on, because like most people, before I had went over to Romania and before our friendship, I knew nothing about it, right? And so there is that really complex history where following Ceausescu, there was a huge orphan boom. I hate saying orphan problem because orphans are not the problem. There are systemic problems that lead to booms and orphans, sadly.
Well said.
Thank you. And so, I mean, as I understand it, Ceausescu in the 70s and 80s, when he was a dictator of Romania, decided that by the 90s, he wanted Romania to be a industrial capital of Eastern Europe and was building all these huge factories in all of these large and mid-sized towns. And in one of the books I read, the gentleman made some comment that led me to believe that there was an increasing tax structure based on how few children you had. So if you had 5 children, you paid less taxes than the person who had 4, 3, 2, or were barren, because Ceausescu was like, this is a really free way to fulfill the workforce of all of these. Which then with, the toppling of Ceausescu and all that in '88, you were left with a country who had a huge need and no infrastructure to handle that, which led to kind of that huge population of orphans through the 80s and 90s. And systemically, that leads to other issues, because if there isn't education, if there's not birth control, if there's not, stable home environments, then those patterns continue. And it never addresses the needs or the education of kind of the orphans and the homeless population, etc. And so that being on one side, and then on the other side of it, the idea of the Gypsy community or the Roma community being a kind of transient community from one way or another. From the stuff that I've read, I always think of the Roma community as kind of almost thinking of them comparatively of the the Native American population in America, because a lot of their roots have been in that country dating back to the 1200s. But because they kind of wandered or they were more transient people, the word gypsy etymologically comes from the word Egypt. And gypsy was kind of used for, as you were saying, anybody who the mainstream population would look at and be like, yeah, you're probably not smart, you're probably kind of dirty, and you move around all the time. You must be one of those, right? Yeah. And I feel like Romania kind of in the mass culture, the Venn diagram overlap is pretty big of the culture going, they may be an orphan, they may be homeless, they may be a Roma community. I'm going to treat them all the same way, which is deplorable. Mm-hmm. When those are really, culturally, really different groups of people, though the need is very similar.
Very much so, yeah. And I think the lack of a home, the two things that we saw within this population of people we're trying to help is tremendously low self-esteem, especially within the mothers. They had no value. They didn't see themselves as having any value at all. And then just a lack of a home, lack of a place where they can say, this is my home. They just didn't have that. And then it just one thing led to another. So then when all these orphans were the problem in their country, they became even more segregated and more despised because the families were having trouble. The regular Romanian families were having trouble taking care of themselves, and the tax burden was tremendously high. And now we got to take care of these kids too. So they just washed them away and just tried to forget about them. They're not even part of our country anyway, because that's one thing about America for the most part is we try to take care of our own as best as we can. The Indians might be the Native Americans might have been a good example of, but the Native Americans, they did have a home and it was here. That's the slight difference with the Roma.
And so when we talk about Point of Hope, it's there in Tarneveni, and it's on the outskirts of town. It's over. Is that factory even still working, or is that factory?
It's done. It's completely closed now.
Yeah. So again, Ceausescu era factory that's built, and across the river. And river is a generous word. It's a very big creek in between Point of Hope and the Roma encampment community, whatever word we want to use. But across the creek, across from Point of Hope, there are these two buildings that one, back when the factory was open, was for single men, and one was for single women. And what are they? They're probably 5 stories tall and 5 rows across. They're probably 25 rooms or so.
Yeah. A little bit more. I think they're 8 stories high. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just say 8 by 8, right? So, and those rooms aren't big. Those are probably 12 by 12 rooms, if that.
Very similar to a dorm room in college.
Yeah. And, I mean, you're talking anywhere between 4 and 10 people living per room approximately, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would say I've seen some where they're even more. Some of the bigger rooms, there's a couple rooms like on corners where larger families can live. I've seen as many as in the winter, if they have a heater in there of some type, 25 to 30 people will sleep in those rooms at night. I mean, I don't know how they do it. They must pile up the kids like cordwood or something. I don't know how they do it, but it's warmth. So.
And so, all right, so you have 8 by 8, you have 5 to 20 people per room, and there's electricity in there, but the only water source is that one spigot. There's one spigot. I'll see if I can find a picture of this, and I'll stick it in the bottom of the frame so people can kind of see what we're talking about. There's one spigot that sticks out of the ground on a piece of metal piping, probably 3 foot, and then there's a spigot, and it typically runs 24/7. They just leave it. That is the water for both of those buildings, all of those people. And it's just heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking. And the story that I've kind of become aware of is, again, when that factory was open, you had these 2 apartments. One was for men and one was for women. And then the hospital, which is now Point of Hope, was across the creek. And that all serviced that factory. And then the factory shut down, everybody moved out, and the Roman community kind of like moved in because 20 people or 15 people to a room, it's still shelter. And so that was and it was, as you were saying, it was on the outskirts of town, and so the people didn't want the Roman living in town and kind of pushed them out, and they built this huge community next to this abandoned factory.
Right.
So we've talked about Point of Hope being a school, but to merely call Point of Hope a school is it really undersells everything that goes on there. From the shower facilities to the faith formation to, again, like the wood shop and the baking classes and all that kind of stuff. So can you tell us a little more about just the facilities and the program? And I feel like we have to talk about Gabi and Daci, or Gabi will send me a very angry email.
Yeah. Well, I think the name, for a while they called it the CDC, Community Development Center. And, that's just very confusing for people here in America, especially within today's environment, the Center of Disease Control and stuff. So we decided to rename it the Point of Hope. And that's truly what this building is. It is a point of hope for this whole community. So besides the schooling that we do, Dan mentioned having the showers, but we have a psychologist on staff, nurses on staff. We have a doctor that comes whenever he's needed. During the COVID thing, we had a hotline to where people who had different issues that they were dealing with could call up the hotline and get help that way. It was just another resource for the Roma community. We gave bags of groceries away during the pandemic. Yeah, we've done a lot there. The bottom floor is being renovated into some bathrooms and stuff, so more facilities for the Roma to use for these people. Yeah, it's just overall, it's a very holistic effort to bring hope to a child. We know education is a tool that can be used to increase the child's ability to have their own voice. But it's got to be more than just education. They got to have hope. They got to have dreams. They got to have desires. They got to have a desire for something better, and we point them towards their faith to lead them in that direction.
And, we have talked about kids an awful lot, and especially the genesis of that being that preschool program. But with the trade school kind of component to it, I mean that's another way that they're helping adolescents develop. The women's groups that meet there.
Yep.
All those sorts of things. It is. I think that Point of Hope is the best name for just that wonderful outreach and that ministry, because it's to say it's a school, like, short sells that so well.
Yeah, because we do have kids. We have the after-school program now, so that's where we started with the preschool program. So when the kids graduate and they're in the first and second grade, it's like, what's next? What else has got to have planned here? So we started an after-school program. And then the kids got up to fifth grade. What do we do now? So we just kept branching out. So now, one cool story. We had 3 boys who were coming to the after-school program, did not want to do their homework. I can't imagine a 12-year-old boy not wanting to do homework, but that did happen. And but we told them that they could not go up into the wood shop and work on their wood projects unless they maintained a certain grade level in their school. They had to be passing and slightly above that. And every one of the boys have conformed to that, and now they're putting more value into their education. They do it so they can go up to the wood project, but that's fine. I mean, they're boys. Yeah, so that was, and the girls have kind of done the same thing with the sewing classroom. They got to maintain certain levels of attendance and grade level to be able to do some of these other. So we want that to be a reward for their discipline for their schooling.
Oh, absolutely. And another great thing about that is that when you take a mission trip group over, between the sewing classroom and the wonderful industrial kitchen there and the wood shop, it allows the U.S. missionaries to engage with their skill sets in a way to teach. And you made this point earlier. How do you love on a kid if you can't speak the language? Well, one of the ways that you do that is you sit down at the sewing machine, or you sit down at the wood shop, or the last time I went over, your son Jared worked magic in the kitchen, teaching these kids how to bake bread and things like that. And I mean, obviously, a part of that is we have wonderful translators who make our job a lot easier. But you bring that skill set, and it always turns into learning together.
So you want to talk about Gabi a little bit. So Gabi, who is the mission coordinator over there, does such a good job. She says what these kids want to do when the Americans come over is to show them what they're doing. They just want to have pride, and they want to kind of show off what they're learning. So while we go up to learn and maybe teach them a little bit about woodworking, what's even more important is letting them show us what they have accomplished. And because they're just so proud of what they are accomplishing. And so Gabi does a really great job of doing that. And Gabi's an amazing woman over there who does tremendous work, tremendous passion for these children. And the ministry would not be what it is without her, and of course Dacian too. But Gabi has that personal link to these kids, and she loves them. But she creates this discipline. She creates some organization to these kids' lives, because when they leave the center, everything's chaos for them. So when they come here, they really want that discipline in their lives. Gabby does a good job of doing that.
And Gabi is one of those people that anytime I ask her any absurd question, which I tend to do often, it's like, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. Give me a day. Everything from, hey, can you find me international postcard stamps from Romania? And she sits there.
I remember that.
Like, what is it with you? Because I always ask her something random. And she's like, give me 2 days. We'll take care. She's like Liam Neeson in my head in the Taken. If anything goes wrong in my life, if I ever need to put a emergency contact, I'm like, Gabi. I could be in Idaho, and I'd be like, no, call Gabi. She'll take care of it. And then, her work, and then also the work of Dacian, who, again, just what a great guy. And he does so much to just help connect on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, he's a great visionary. He sees things that these kids are going to need in the future that we don't see, because the teachers are busy teaching and Gabi's leading mission trips and stuff. So Dacian's kind of the visionary for the organization over there and does a really good job of anticipating the ongoing or the upcoming needs of these children.
And this is probably embarrassing for me to say as a pastor, I don't think there's a better person I have met in my life who you can start having a conversation about one thing, and he snakes you around and brings you right back to the gospel. I don't know how he does it. Like, he catches me off guard. We were going to pick up watermelon one day, and I'm in the car and we're driving, and he's telling me about his kids doing karate, and how much we were getting watermelon. My kids like watermelon. My kids do karate. My daughter was a little afraid of it. I told her you have to be like Daniel in the Lion's Den, and I'm just like, Daci, where did that come from, man? He goes, we always have to be thinking about it. And yeah, introspective guy, wonderful visionary, and every time I see him, it's just a joy and a privilege.
Tremendous man of faith. Tremendous man of faith.
We've talked a lot about Point of Hope, and we'll come back to that. But let's talk about some other programs that Another Child Foundation does. Because, again, the wings spread pretty far there. And I know that one of the things that's tied in some ways to Point of Hope is the VBS Summer Camp Week. Because those are all kids from Point of Hope, right? That's kind of like a carrot on a stick. If your marks are this level and your behavior is straight, then you are on the right path. Then we will. Then that's an award or a reward at the end of the year. You get to go to the camp.
Yeah, yep. That's the way we structure it. We want to dangle that carrot out in front of them, because these kids need incentive for these things, because they don't think beyond the daily survival. A lot of them. We're getting past that now, where these kids are trying to organize their thoughts and their goals and stuff like that. But for a lot of these kids, having that goal out there in the distance is really important for them. It keeps them on track immediately. So the VBS camp is a tremendous way for us to, what I call, in the school, they get kind of what I call a Sunday school education, which is fine. The teachers are not pastors. They're not designed to be lifting up the spiritual needs of these children in their school. So, pastors need to do that. So what we do at camp is kind of take that and let them do some faith exploration and try to explain, why does the Bible tell this story and what is the purpose behind it and things like that. Something that really affects their lives, so they can get a handle on, because they truly believe that, or did believe that, the Bible was just a bunch of stories that somebody made up, and they're more like fables and stuff like that, rather than true life stories that happened that God is using to teach us. So they just kind of looked at more as a storybook, because that's all they hear really is these stories about, Daniel and the lion's den and stuff. But how can they apply that to their lives? What does this story mean to you, and how can you apply it to your life? So that's how we use camp. Plus, it's a time for them to get out of their environment for a week, eat 4 healthy meals a day, to get good sleep into a good, comfortable bed and things like that. So while it is a retreat for them, we usually really to take their faith to a new level.
Yeah. And I remember the first time I went over, it was doing summer camp. That was back in 2012, 2011, sometime around there. And I remember it was a really telling experience for me because we ended up going by Point of Hope after summer camp. But I had no context for, the two buildings or the creek or, like what Tarneveni looked like. And I forget who it was probably Dachi. Sits these kids down and he explains to them where they're going to stay in the dorms because it's like a summer camp. Like for us, it would be Lutheran outdoor ministry camp, right? It's kind of set up in that kind of style where each room has bunk beds and every kid gets a bunk bed and all that sort of thing. And Dachi walked the kids through, showed them the sleeping arrangements, and told them that every kid got a bed. And that was the loudest cheer I had heard the entire week. These kids were so excited. And then he started talking about how the expectation was that kids are going to shower every morning. Like you had to take a shower. And the kids were kind of, there's a little bubble up about that. And so I asked one of the translators, and she again pointed me back to those huge 8-story buildings in Tarneveni. And she goes, some of these kids are raised in an environment where they're told if there is water coming out of the ceiling, you don't get in it. Yeah. So then she was talking about the efforts at Point of Hope, where like teaching kids things like hygiene, things that we take for granted in the Western world in so many different ways, and how that's an ongoing kind of educational reality there. And it was one of those things that A, broke my heart, and B, really inspired me, to as we were talking about, put the most that I could into that week to make sure that I was on the level with the kids, not talking down to them, but building those friendships, building those relationships. And me typically wearing a horse mask and running around.
Yeah, that was quite the
a horse mask, right? So this was 16. It was that last time we were out there, and I was out there with the high school kids. I don't know. It was one of the trips, and for some reason, I thought it was a good idea to fly to Romania with a horse mask.
Yeah, I remember that, Dan. That was what you weren't with the high school teams. You went with Jared's trip.
Oh, that was trip. Yeah.
2018, I think.
Yep.
And it was kind of scary, but the kids seemed to enjoy it.
Yeah, and we made a game out of it that I put on a mask and ran around the Point of Hope Center, and the kids had to catch me. Which, if you've ever worn a rubber horse mask, you have no peripheral vision. You barely see out of these little holes, and you can't breathe because it's all latex rubber. The fact that there's playground equipment and holes in the dirt and all that kind of stuff. And the whole time I'm running, I'm just like, don't blow a knee, don't roll an ankle. And worse, like, don't trip over a child, because they would come out of everywhere. And the other part was like flying to Romania. I went through customs and I got stopped. And the guy my bag and he pulls out this horse mask and he just looks at me. And that was the Jared trip. So I was flying over by myself. And I'm sitting there in customs going, everybody I need to meet is on, like, Dachi is on the other side of this. Yeah. And I got to explain why I have a rubber horse mask standing in the best airport, which I think I left that mask in Romania. I gave it, like, one of the kids at the end of the week was like, just so, left it to the kid, left it with the kid. And then some of the translators messaged me when I got home, and they're like, we can't believe you left the horse mask. Or Luca or one of them, Paula maybe. I get a message from her, and she's like, you're the worst person. We have to look at that every day now. Oh, man. So what has COVID and the pandemic meant to Point of Hope and the ministry that's going on?
Yeah. Well, there's two theories on COVID. When it first came out, there's two things. One is it's going to spread rapidly through the Roma community because of the closeness, and you get 20 people in one room and it's going to be a nightmare. But the other theory was, well, their immune system is so high because they live in this dirt and poverty all the time that maybe it won't affect them. And luckily, it's kind of been, of course, they're not getting tested like many of us are, but it doesn't seem to have affected the Roma community any more or less than just the normal community. So I believe God protected them from that, because talking about people who are susceptible to transmission of a disease, holy cow, it couldn't get, dirty, close together all the time. It was prime for rapid movement, but it didn't really happen. So, so they were lucky that way.
Has the government there done things like we've seen in America with like shutting things down and all that kind of thing? Or?
Almost exactly the same protocols have been put into place, at least in Illinois, as in Romania. No more, at first, you got to be groups of 3 or less. You social distance and all this. Yeah, it was almost exactly the same. And even in the closing of the schools, the opening of the schools has all been very similar to what we see here in the U.S. Of course, they're part of the European Union, so they were under the same protocols of France and Italy and England and stuff like that. So, so it didn't surprise me that they had the same. But how the Roma community actually reacted to it was good, because we were scared for a while that it was going to wipe out a lot of that community, but luckily it didn't.
And when you talk about like and we see this in America, we've seen this since March. When you start shutting down schools, especially schools that have a before school program or an after school program or anything like that, you're not only shutting down the educational aspect of it, but you're shutting down all those social functions too.
Yeah,
so for a place of point of hope that has women's groups, that gives showers, that gives meals, the idea of shutting it down means you're taking food out of the mouths of kids.
yeah.
But you guys have been able to kind of support the community the whole time.
Yeah. So what we did is we had an appeal, because there's an emergency appeal that we needed to make. So we went out to our donors and said, this is our need. We have a need. We need to supply nearly 100 families with 1 or 2 grocery bags of food every week, because these children are not getting it at their homes. And most of our adults, families, mothers, fathers work day jobs. So all those jobs were gone. So they had nothing. They had virtually had nothing. So we started supplying grocery bags to these children and their families. And we did that for 12 weeks. So we did it through the middle of June until they lifted some of the regulations to where jobs were starting to come back and kids could start coming back into school and getting food again. But for 12 weeks, we were totally giving as much as we could to these families, and not just food, but hygiene products too, to just try to get them thinking about the hygiene part of survival.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I had Sundays here at Faith. We have a socially distant picnic from 12 to 2 to just allow people to safely kind of see one another and bring their own food. And this past Sunday, the 23rd, we were joined by the Congregational Relations Director of Lutheran Social Services here in Central Ohio. And my good friend Ben Powers was talking to us about the role of food pantries, especially during the pandemic, when kind of the trickle-down economics kind of dries up. Because if people aren't working, they're not buying, and if they're not buying, they don't have extra, and they don't contribute to food pantries as much. And he just told us last Sunday a very similar story, which is, we put out they put out a request for these like 7 items, so that for the duration of the summer, they could make sure that any family or client who showed up, they're like, okay, here it is. Like, because that's what we're here to do, help one another, provide for one another. So it's awesome to hear that, you guys kind of said, all right, well, what can we do? Let's start handing out bags of food to families. Again, the words of Jesus, like anytime you saw anybody who was hungry and didn't feed them, like that's what we're called to do, to provide. So speaking of donors and things like that, you and I had a conversation about 2 months ago, and I asked you, I was like, hey, what can we do? What can we do here in the Whitehall, Columbus area to support ACF? And you were talking about the hand sanitizing stations, which, as we all know in the pandemic, sanitization is paramount. And you said you were trying to get those units for the Point of Hope School. And you challenged me to see if we could get 6 of them.
Yeah.
And we found them on the Amazon wish list, that kind of thing. So I said to my congregation, look, this is how much they are priced per unit. The challenge is, can we do 6? And I'm really happy to say that I talked to our church bookkeeper yesterday, and we have raised enough in 4 weeks, under 4 weeks, because Sunday at this point is 2 days away, to provide the funds for 6 hand sanitizing units for the Point of Hope School. And so we're going to get that check in the mail to you hopefully Monday morning. But my challenge to my congregation for August was, how do we reach out across town and around the world? So every Sunday I had people drop off food goods for the LSS food pantry, and every Sunday I make the pitch of, all right, like, this is what we're doing in Columbus, and then this is what we're doing on the other side of the world. So I guess my question for you is, what do those hand sanitizer units mean for the teachers and the staff and the children at Point of Hope?
Yeah, well, they mean a lot. I mean, it's going to protect. I mean, it's about protection. It's about respect for everybody. So, I mean, sometimes the big argument here in this country is about masks. Should we wear masks? Well, I don't really feel I need it, but it's really more about protecting your brother and your sister rather than just about yourself. So that's one of the things we're trying to teach them, is by washing your hands and stuff and being clean, you're helping not just yourself, but you're helping everybody around you. So we're trying to get their eyes off of themselves and understand that the cleaning process is while it's needed and you need to do that personally, it's really more about protecting others. So getting your eyes off yourself and learning how to help others, besides the obvious of being clean and not be able to transmit the disease. But the underlying message that we're trying to give these children is, think about other people, not just yourself.
Yeah. So I guess my last question is what does the international mission field look like in terms of, if people want to go on a trip? Are trips happening in 2021?
Yeah. So in 2020, we've had to cancel all of our trips. We are going to do one trip to Operation Christmas Child in Chicago to kind of pack Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes, but that's more of a one-day mission trip. So we try to give mission trip opportunities to everybody using all the different skill sets, times of years, price points, locations, and things like that. But in 2021, we're really excited. We're going to be going back to Romania at least twice. We may be doing a Christmas in Romania trip at the end of 2021, but we're going to be doing our VBS trip, which is always really popular. That's in the summer. And then in October, we always take a team over to deliver humanitarian aid that we're going to be collecting during the summer and spring of 2021. The other opportunities that we have is we've also outreached. Now we're going to be going to Guatemala and South Africa. Those are other 2 trips. We're doing a medical mission trip to South Africa. So if there's anybody in your congregation that would love to learn more about either of those opportunities, and of course you can go on to the Another Child Foundation webpage and you can see all types of mission opportunities. But what we try to do is give diversity of opportunities to people from skill sets, times of years, price points, and things like that, to get everybody involved in missions. As many people want to be involved in missions, I want to say we have an opportunity for you. So,
and just what's that website?
AnotherChildFoundation.org.
All right, I'll put that in the description below. Tim, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for talking about ACF. It's always good to see you, my friend. And we'll do this again soon.
All right. Thank you, Dan, and God bless you and your congregation.
Thanks, bud. Bye.
All right.